Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. So, heresy is incoming. What are we likely to face? It's meant to be an upending to the entire Hive pantheon, but it's also supposed to be the prelude to everything that's coming next in Destiny. To say that a lot is riding on heresy is an understatement. In the past, there have been a lot of make-or-break moments for this franchise, and yet again, we are arriving at another one of them here. But heresy, for what it is worth, feels tangibly different because it needs to establish something completely new. A threat that goes beyond what we've seen thus far, and a promise that there is something out there which is going to present us with a purpose as Guardians once again. With that in mind, I wanted to take a look at everything that we might potentially see in Heresy. So, let's talk about what to expect from this final episode. First things first, for those of you who have been living under a rock and know no context about any of this, let's talk about some base common knowledge that you should probably have. We are certainly in this episode returning to the Dreadnought. The Dreadnought is a vessel that once belonged to Oryx, the Taken King, the father of Crota and brother to both Savathûn, the Hive God of Cunning, and Xivu Arath, the Hive God of War. And of course, he was also the first Hive to ever take control of the Taken. His Dreadnought is also his throne world, or rather was, seeing as we defeated him back in the Taken King expansion. The fact that the Dreadnought is his throne world is a little bit paradoxical. It's something that shouldn't be possible because throne worlds normally are in a different dimension. This one is within our physical reality, and it is a testament to how powerful Oryx was. Something you also might probably not know is that the Dreadnought is made out of the remains of a worm god, Akka, the Worm of Secrets, the worm that Oryx slew. That's mostly what we know, alongside what I said earlier about the fact that the Hive Pantheon is supposedly going to be flipped on its head, or shaken around a lot, changed irrevocably. If this does involve the Hive Pantheon, that means that our first real topic of conversation needs to be about the gods that are involved in this. So let's talk about that for a second. Before we Guardians properly came along and started dealing damage to them, the Hive Pantheon was an expansive thing, but there were a few major deities that you could point to. There were, of course, the ones that could collectively be known as the Big Three, the siblings, the progeny of the original Osmium King, the rulers that found themselves at the head of the Osmium dynasty. They were, of course, Oryx, the Taken King, Savathûn, the Witch Queen, and Xivu Arath, the Hive God of War, the three siblings that we mentioned earlier. With Oryx being dead as of the Taken King expansion, it's likely that if this is relating to the gods, that predominantly it will relate to Xivu Arath and Savathûn. But, as I'll talk more about later, we've already got hints from the name of the episode that resurrecting an old Hive god like Oryx isn't necessarily off the table. There are also children of these gods, who are sort of in a weird place of potentially being able to be resurrected, or maybe being able to claim some degree of power. They're not full gods in their own right, and I think a story following them would be a bit weird, but they do have demigod-like powers in some cases, and, well, some of them are directly related to the Dreadnought. See Savathûn's daughter, or one of Savathûn's daughters, known as Balwa, who was an attendant within the court of Oryx. Or see Halak and Anuk, Oryx's own Death Singer daughters, twins that, between the two of them, created the Death Song, Oversouls, and Annihilator totems, some of the most powerful inventions and weapons of the Hive. Nokris is also dead, but he is probably the most heretical figure we've seen in all of Hive history, at least according to what the Hive might consider to be a heretic. So the chance that he might also be resurrected and might be at the center of this story is a possibility too. Then we have to think about the other gods within the Pantheon, because yes, there are the Big Three, there's also the Worm Gods. These were the original gods that all the Hive worshipped, and whilst Xivu Arath, Oryx, and Savathûn all rose to prominence and probably overshadowed these gods for the sake of their own power, they are still terrible figures and are technically the gods of all the Hive, including Oryx, Savathûn, and Xivu Arath at the time. So they are very much still important. When we entered onto the scene back in 2014, 4 of the original 5 worm gods were still alive, and of course the worm mother Zeta was still alive back in Rolk's pyramid. She was still a captive. The other remaining 4 that still lived were the Everhunger, Aya the Keeper of Order, Zol the Will of Thousands, and Yul the Honest Worm. Arka, the Worm of Secrets, had been killed long ago by Alrix before he became Oryx the Taken King. The Worm Mother Zeta would also die during the span of Witch Queen, when we fought Rolk above the Upended, which she was supposedly powering. And of course, prior to all of this, we killed Zol back on Mars in Warmind during the span of, well, a very short campaign, and with the assistance of the Warmind Rasputin. So now we've gone down from 5 worm gods and a worm mother to just 3 worm gods, the Everhunger, Aya the Keeper of Order, and Yul the Honest Worm. As best we know from limited intelligence we have on the subject, Yul is the greatest of the remaining worm gods, so great in fact that he was looking at Zol with the intent of devouring him to obtain his power. Though it does appear that at some point in the past, Aya might also have had a certain degree of authority, and I say this because back in the Books of Sorrow, before the crafting of the Dreadnought had truly taken place, Aya was able to command Oryx to return to his throne world and set his house in order, and Oryx obliged that request. So maybe there is a little authority found within the Keeper of Order still. The worm gods as a whole are in a very interesting position right now, with Xivu Arath having been weakened and with the Lucent Brood no longer needing to satisfy the blood tithe of their hive worms thanks to the light of the Traveler. The worm gods are now in a place where they have more authority over some hive, but less over others. Savathûn can safely disregard the children of Zeta, but their grip over Xivu Arath has probably tightened even further, especially after the death of the Witness, who previously would have held dominion over all of them. If a power vacuum has appeared within those darkness-aligned hive, it is possible that the worm gods and Xivu Arath are in open contest with each other, as is demanded by the sword logic. If we're also going to get even more technical about hive gods and who qualifies, then we also have to at least for a moment consider Eris Morn. Though she gave up her position as the hive god of vengeance at the end of the Season of the Witch, Eris is still a powerful figure to the hive. As Crota's Bane back in the earlier days of Destiny, she was a scourge to the broods of Oryx and Crota, commanding the Guardians to victory against all odds. In the more recent days, she is one of the only people who has been able to strike a significant wound to both Xivu Arath and Savathûn. Whilst neither were fatal, both were significant. Eris consumed much of Savathûn's power in the moment where she killed the Witch Queen, and subsequently used that power to banish Xivu Arath from her own throne world, rendering her mortal. The act of doing this went against the nature of the sword logic, and so she forfeited any godlike power that she'd gained from Savathûn for this act. But she is still one of the most knowledgeable on the hive as a topic, and therefore, even though she doesn't have this power, she is worthy of respect. Nobody within the Coalition knows the hive better than Eris, and those third-party sources, such as Toland the Shattered, should not be universally trusted. They have their own agendas, and their intent with our own actions is likely to further those agendas, potentially to our own detriment. So Eris should really be the one with the final say on this matter, and yes, when we talk about hive gods, we should talk about Eris. Finally, and on a note that will persistently come up in this video, we can't talk about hive gods without talking even so briefly about those who aspire to become them, and I think top of that list is Toland the Shattered, an old warlock who led Eris and her fire team down into the Hellmouth to face Crota, the son of Oryx, and who ultimately got them all killed, including himself. Though that was a part of his plan, he was able to cheat death via the death song of Ur-Yut, and he did so by creating a meager throne world within the Ascendant Plane's Sea of Screams. From this place, it's possible that he could reach out and take up the mantle that he suggested we should inhabit, the mantle of the Taken King. You see, Toland has always been a true believer in the sword logic ever since he deduced its infallible nature, and the thing about the sword logic to Toland is that it always demands structure. There is a structure to the idea that there must always be a most powerful one, and when we didn't take up the mantle of the Taken King, he called us squanderers. If Toland could somehow acquire a great degree of power through, say, maybe an echo, then maybe he himself might believe that he has enough power to reach out and find a means of taking up that mantle for himself. Of course, there are further possibilities. If the Hive worship the sword logic and the power it grants them, then they are worshipping at the feet of a power greater potentially than even the Witness. It is worth remembering that they have reached out to it before. Oryx's contact with the Deep itself, as he called it, saw an entity beyond comprehension reaching back, indwelling within an unborn ogre. It spoke to him in a way that is unfamiliar for the Witness, referring to itself as I, not we, representing a singular entity instead of the Witness's plural compound being. It spoke to Oryx as though he was an old friend, and as though he was also that old friend's harsh mentor. There is no concrete confirmation of any of this, but it is very likely, based on the verbiage used and the wording that is pronounced, that this was the Winnower speaking to Oryx. And if the Winnower is going to be the central part of any future saga in Destiny, it makes some degree of sense that its influence starts with the Hive, and potentially even starts on the Dreadnought. Across all the episodes we've seen so far, there is one thing that we know for sure. Every episode has had an echo in it thus far. A source of both darkness and light that was ejected from the Traveler after the moment of the Witness's defeat. There were 3 echoes, and we have seen the fate of 2 of them thus far. In Echoes, the first episode, we saw that one of them had been claimed by Maya Sundaresh, and she was wresting control over the Vex on Nessus. In Revenant, we saw that Fikrul had claimed a second, and that he was using it to create the Revenant Scorn, and to empower himself and those that followed him. In Heresy, well, we have no idea who's claimed it. We've known that Fikrul would have an echo for a long time, and we knew that the first echo had fallen into the hands of someone, which was eventually revealed to be the Conductor, and then was revealed to be Maya Sundaresh. But Heresy has remained, well, a mystery. We have no idea who has claimed the echo just yet, but anyone who has claimed it would have the power to influence the Hive Pantheon in a manner that might change them all forever. So, let's talk about possibilities. Who might have claimed the echo? Well, first of all, Xivu Arath. We've never seen the Hive God of War in the flesh, and if Bungie's looking to make a splash with Heresy, they might have decided to make her a central part of the story to the point where they're finally revealing her, and where they're making it so that she claims the echo. If she does claim the echo, then this is unprecedented for her. It not only gives her power over life, but also gives her the ability to use the light, just like Savathun does. And this might be the reason why the episode is called Heresy. After all, claiming the powers of the light in any way other than to devour it would make Xivu Arath a heretic by her own logic and laws. They believe the light to be a weakness. They believe that the darkness must stamp it out. However, it's worth remembering that claiming the light like this might represent a major break in Xivu Arath as a person. And I don't mean that to say that the character isn't well written. I mean it to say that she has gone through one of the more traumatic things that a Hive God might possibly have to endure. Being banished from your own throne world and losing your ability to be immortal is something that will absolutely have set her on the back foot. This might have left her weakened and desperate, and that might lead her into a place where she is perhaps desperate enough to be willing to betray everything that she's ever believed in. Especially with the defeat of the Witness, the supremacy of the darkness is now in question for her, and I imagine that if she claims the echo, it would undoubtedly be something that allows her to pursue the sword logic with both light and darkness, and thus, to some she is a heretic, even perhaps to herself, but she is still trying her best to live as she is meant to. This is the interesting point, I think, that gets brought up by Xivu Arath claiming it entirely. Heresy itself is an interesting thing to the Hive because Heresy can have a lot of different meanings, and as it turns out, the power of the light does not necessarily stop you from following the sword logic. It is a tool that can be used. It is not to say that you believe in bomb logic to use the light. This is kind of the same idea that has been followed by Savathun's Hive Guardians. They have shown that they still worship the sword logic. They just allow each other to become sharper by letting their ghosts resurrect them so that they can learn in martial combat against each other. This is one of those moments where yet again maybe we need to tie apart the light from the Traveler and the darkness from the Veil, or the Witness, or any other entity that might claim control over it, and state that one can indeed be a heretic in some people's eyes, but still follow the sword logic. There's interesting Hive philosophy to look at throughout this entire thing, and all of it really becomes complex if Xivu decides that yes, she will claim the Echo. As far as our other likely contender is concerned, we of course have to talk about Savathun. She is likely to be the other claimant of the Echo, or at least a driving force in the background of the narrative of this episode. She is also quite notably planning for what's coming next already. Savathun's first gambit against us was to claim the powers of the light. This allowed her to detach herself from the losing side of the Witness, and to obtain an even greater form of immortality in the process. It's worth remembering that she is now the most resilient being in all of Destiny, being the only person to have access to both a throne world and a living ghost. With the Echo in her grasp, she might be able to accomplish what she sees as the next step in her plans. And even without any of that, taking the Echo would make her nearly invincible due to the amount of power that she gains. Whether her plans are to ascend to a higher reality, to prepare to survive the next combat against the Winnower, or perhaps to accomplish something greater that we do not yet understand, is a mystery to us. But doubtless, she will be watching, she will be thinking about whether she should claim the Echo, and she will be critical to the future of all stories involving the Hive, particularly those that involve the Hive Pantheon. Even when she isn't directly involved, expect her agents to have parts to play, or expect her to be pulling some strings in the background. At bare minimum, she'll be aware of whatever's going on and will maneuver herself and her minions to take advantage of that situation. In all of these possibilities, there are wildcards as well. We could see characters such as Toland claim the Echo, like I talked about earlier, thus ushering in a new Hive god to the Pantheon in this moment of calamitous change. Toland has long sought that position of the Taken King, and I think that there is a decent possibility that if he somehow managed to find the Echo, that he might be able to embrace that position for himself and take power. Whether that happens or not is yet to be seen. Of course, if we're looking to shake up the Pantheon's existing members, maybe the Echo will be claimed by one of the remaining worm gods. This would upset the dynamic that the Hive have enjoyed for so long. The worm gods are superior to them, but since Oryx killed Akka, they've been much less of a serious threat to the Hive's own machinations. With Savathun having abandoned them, and with Xivu Arath being weakened, the worm gods might be in this position where claiming light and dark makes sense to them, especially with the death of the Witness. And this would also leave the entire Pantheon in chaos. The Hive would have seen their gods betray them, and yet again, this makes for another moment at which Heresy's prediction of the entire Pantheon being turned on its head come true. And then there is an even bigger question surrounding the Echo. Not just who would claim it, but who's inside the Echo. You see, every Echo contains the remnants of a civilization that was folded into the final shape by the Witness. In the instance of the previous Echoes, we saw that a Kugu Commander was folded into Maya's Echo of Command, and an Elixni Elder was folded into Fikrul's Echo of Reese. The Echo of Reese, yes, that was likely to be Chelchis, the Kell of Stone, by the way, but we don't know that it was her for certain. So if this Echo is discovered and there is an entity within it, as there was with the last two, who is that entity going to be? Are they going to be an Echo of Fundament or something? Are they going to be a Hive-adjacent entity? If so, does that make them a survivor of the Ammonite, the first species that the Hive put to the torch? Maybe a memory of a helium drinker overlord? Maybe something else. Whatever the case, they must have been folded into the final shape by the Witness. Maybe it is one of the remaining worms that was left behind on Fundament. Who knows? Either way, again, the Witness is the key here, and whatever character is within the Echo must have interacted with them. If we are going back to the Dreadnought, it'd be best to know what we're up against. Beyond the basics, the Dreadnought has been floating in Saturn's orbit since Oryx's defeat. The circle it blasted in Saturn's rings is still there, as it hasn't had enough time for the asteroid belt to return to a more normal state and heal that scar. The preview for the episode seemed to imply that we would become sort of the navigators of the Dreadnought. This might imply that we are the ones who'll be pushing to take control of the Hive in some fashion. If not the Hive, then the Dreadnought itself. This matters because the set of armor referenced in this conversation is a Hive armor set that is being called the Navigator armor, and that word Navigator is really the key. This is a reference to Oryx's position as the first Navigator. Oryx, being the Taken King and at one time the most powerful Hive god, made him one who was capable of commanding entire legions, and, of course, he was the one that would adequately chart their course into the deep, towards the final shape. So, if we're going to claim the Navigator armor, are we perhaps making our own pathways into the deep? Speaking of charting our way into the deep, Oryx's throne world is something that will undoubtedly still exist. Perhaps I should clarify. The Dreadnought as its entirety is not Oryx's throne world. The inner reaches are. The Dreadnought is baleful armor that encapsulates the throne world, and the throne world does exist in real space as it has been turned inside out. The Hive still celebrate this if they're keeping to their old holiday of Inversion Day, which they celebrate by turning things inside out. It's worth remembering that within this particular cyst, this throne world that Oryx made, there are potentially staggering items of power that are still around. For example, the Tablets of Ruin can be found in Golgoroth's cellar, which might include the knowledge of the powers to take. Remember that this same knowledge was used by the Witness to literally abduct planets. So ultimately, if you're looking for some kind of super weapon, yeah, you've got one right there, just waiting in the middle of Golgoroth's cellar. But that's not the only one. The Dreadnought had its own cannon, a weapon that was fired during the Battle of Saturn and which, in a single shot, destroyed the entirety of the Awoken fleet but for a few survivors. Whilst it's been offline for the last decade, as best we know, it could be reactivated in some manner. If it does get reactivated, it'd present a terrible addition to anyone's arsenal if they tried to use it. As a reminder, this weapon doesn't just kill things in proximity to the Dreadnought, it sends out a pulse from Oryx's throne world, enveloping all those in proximity to the Dreadnought in the Taken King's power and taking them. The wave is in itself a massive concussive blast as well, which means that if you're not killed, you are surviving, but only to be taken by Oryx. Ships will be destroyed. Anyone who's left over becomes Oryx's servants as they are folded into his throne world as it is momentarily allowed to fling itself into real space. Imagine that this is a beam that kills you if it doesn't abduct you, and that gives you at least a vague description of the weapon. If Oryx's presence, and the presence of his sword which was used to fire this, is required, and maybe the weapon doesn't operate anymore, but the apparatus for the weapon is still there, and I wouldn't trust the idea that it is completely defunct. The Dreadnought is also home to a series of tactical assets that must be considered beyond this. First of all, we have the Dantalian Exodus 6, a Skyburner Cabal warship that crashed into the hull of the Dreadnought. At worst, this wreck is just a shell filled with more Hive, but at best, it might become a functional command post from which we would be able to conduct some operations on the Dreadnought. They might be performed with the help of Empress Keitel and her agents, who would know the ship's systems better than us. The ship is also important because of the path through the Dantalian Exodus 6, which leads us towards the Dreadnought's core. This is a critical tactical objective that we absolutely must secure given what we know about it. Whilst it's unlikely that the hive would want to damage the core, it's something that we should seek to control and protect. And that's because of what happened, or nearly happened, back in the Taken King. A pair of Cabal Bond brothers took over the core and threatened to detonate it if their Primus wasn't returned to them. As it turned out, the Primus had been taken by Oryx and was then killed by us. There was no returning him at all. But the Vanguard projected that if the Bond brothers did detonate the Dreadnought's core, the resulting shockwave of destroying a paradoxical throne world would destroy half of Sol. Yes, half the solar system. So yeah, we do need to keep that out of the hands of bad actors, because otherwise they happen to have the biggest improvised explosive in history within their grasp. The Dreadnought is wild in that way. There's just a lot of stuff in there that is unbelievably powerful, and we're not even getting to the residents of the Dreadnought yet. These residents might at least be a little bit less organized than they were 10 years ago. When Osiris visited the Dreadnought, he tapped into the Hive's intelligence networks and perceived that the Dreadnought was filled with chaos. This chaos might have given room for even greater foes to arise though, and that's because Oryx's Dreadnought also had something containing powerful foes, a prison facility, namely the Hanging Crypts. It's within these crypts that Oryx imprisoned some of the most powerful Hive that ever tried to rise against him, including Ala-Kul, who at the time was known as the Darkblade. Ala-Kul raised an entire brood worth of Hive in order to try and take Oryx's place. He failed and was imprisoned here until he was eventually killed by us. The thing about the entirety of this Hive prison facility though is that it's massive, it is cavernous, and the Darkblade was just one resident of this prison. The silent brood that resides within it, be they either prisoner or guard, may be in chaos, but if there is a powerful individual that lies at the heart of all of this, they might be able to rise from the crypts and take advantage of the chaos left by a power vacuum. And this is to say nothing of what lies deep near the heart of the vessel, the Court of Oryx. If you're looking for powerful Hive, this is another place to find them. This is the High War, where Ascendant Hive of old would come to learn at the foot of Oryx's teachings. It is where the greatest generals did battle against each other to sharpen themselves, and where Oryx's Ascendants rose to bring their tribute to their god. If any of those powerful Hive are still about, that might be something we need to contest as well, if only to stop them from uniting with their brethren throughout the system. Also remember that one of those Ascendants was Balwer, one of the daughters of Savathûn. She never had a huge degree of narrative relevance, but with Savathûn now actually being a major story character, it might be a change that Bungie could follow. Speaking of Savathûn, it's likely that she has resurrected some assets within the Dreadnought and is running a kind of tactical ground war for control of it. I say this because some of Oryx's old brood turned up in the Ghosts of the Deep dungeon, in particular Oryx's right hand, the Sword of Oryx, known as Ekthar. He was resurrected as a Hive Lightbearer and turned into the Shield of Savathûn, a Hive Lightbearer knight who we fought and killed in the process. They were leading an operation to find Oryx's corpse and resurrect it using a combination of necromancy and a Hive Ghost. If they had turned Oryx into a Hive Guardian, who knows what would have happened. But regardless, Savathûn had to find Ekthar and the other members of Oryx's brood somewhere, and it appears that they would have found that brood down within the Dreadnought. So it's likely that Savathûn's ghosts have been here, and that as a result, a foothold might have been established by the Lucent brood. If that is what's going on, then we might see Hive battling other Hive, a novelty that we've not actually witnessed at all. Even in the Season of the Witch, when we saw various forces under Xivu Arath's command making their way through, we never actually saw the Lucent brood fighting a different brood of Hive. So who knows what happens here? I would gather that if that has happened, Xivu Arath's brood might be on the back foot, given that Hive Guardians represent a unique tactical advantage that Savathûn would be able to leverage. And then, amongst all of the chaos, amongst all of the various powerful Hive, amongst all of the terrible things on the Dreadnought that we need to take into account, there is a further, stranger part to the Dreadnought still, which is that in Heresy it looks as though the Dreadnought is somehow changing. Parts of it, and parts of the heretical arsenal weapons, can be seen in concept art, and these parts are peeling away, with the flesh of the ship being removed to reveal what can only be described as a skeletal structure beneath it. This is completely new to the Dreadnought, which may have always been a bit, well, frankly musky and dead, but has never been skeletal like this before. And if this is something that's happening, we don't know why it's happening. So maybe that's something that we'll see revealed in the Heresy stream, but for the moment, it looks as though the Dreadnought itself is undergoing a vast and rapid change. Whatever's responsible for this is likely to also be the one in control of the Echo, although that's not a guarantee. And I think it's worth pointing out again at this moment that the Dreadnought itself is something to remember and consider, and the reason for that is simple. It is what remains of Akka, the Worm of Secrets. This thing is armored in the remains of a Hive worm god. And if Heresy for the Hive is the resurrection of dead things, well, you can start to see where this is going. I don't know if that's how this would even function, but if someone is in control of the Echo and is trying to resurrect a dead worm god that is a part of the Dreadnought, well, there's a terrible chimeric thing going on there, and we should probably stop it. In all this chaos, it at least seems like we're probably going to have some familiar faces joining us along the way. Eris Morn will once again be central to this season as her eternal battle against the Hive evolves once more. Expect her to be our guide, as she is with all things concerning the Hive. However, expect her to also have a newfound degree of confidence, ever since she dealt a mortal blow to Xivu Arath and even struck a killing blow against Savathûn. She is now one who has a vast degree of experience actually killing Hive gods for herself, not just commanding armies against them. Regardless, she also knows Hive Apocrypha better than anyone, and one of the armor sets for this episode is an armor set that implies you are one of Eris's chosen champions. She will be central to this, make no mistake. She might be accompanied by those who have somewhat less experience dealing with the Hive, but still experienced nonetheless. In this regard, there are a few characters that I think we will potentially see. First of all, Ikora Rey, who was instrumental in the campaign against Savathûn in the Witch Queen, and who is the commander of the hidden agents of the city, of which Eris Morn is one. We might also see another close confidant of Eris Morn, Mara Sov, who has had to contest the Hive in the Dreaming City for many years, and who has also had to face Savathûn in her own time. It's possible that Deputy Commander Sloane might also lend a hand here, especially if Xivu Arath is involved and is looking for a rematch. Empress Keitel's continual feud against the Hive might also demand her presence in this episode. After all, the Hive took Toro Bartel under Xivu Arath's command, and with a little bit of an assist from Savathûn. Any way in which she can wound the Hive is a plus. There are also some Hive ghosts that might be involved in the story. Imaru would certainly follow Savathûn wherever she went, and he wouldn't necessarily be looking to help us. Finch, on the other hand, knows the inner workings of the Lucent Hive, and is indeed someone who we might be able to rely on and trust. He proved himself during the Witch Queen campaign, and is still our conspiratorial contact within the throne world. And finally, wherever Eris Morn goes, the Drifter is likely to follow. Eris and the Drifter, or Germain or Wu Ming, whatever name he's running by at the time, have been on the verge of a romantic relationship for quite some time. The Drifter's latest quests, where he's asking us to ferry bento boxes to Eris, are just the latest evolution of that relationship. It's one where they see each other with mutual respect. They've both survived their own hells, their own apocalypses, and have been changed for it. And despite the darkness that surrounded them in both their tales, they were able to see some commonality. They are both members of the so-called Dark Vanguard, alongside Elsie Bray, aka the Exo Stranger, and both of them have learned to see the hope and light of everything that is around them even in this calamitous time. They made it through disaster, and are here for each other. I think if Eris is having any kind of narrative evolution, as she did in Season of the Witch, the Drifter will be there, and he will be one to support her and be in her corner for the most part. Of course, there are other characters, be they completely new to the franchise or as of yet unheard of, that could also make an appearance. At the top of that list for me, I think, would be Luzaku, a hive wizard who now takes up residence within the Blooming, a lost sector within the Pale Heart of the Traveler, although whether she would leave that place is unknown. Of course, there could be further characters that have received limited or perhaps no voice acting at all within Destiny. I'm thinking, of course, about Toland, but also there is that odd possibility wherever the Hive stories go where you could throw Teox into the mix and it would be possible, even if it is a long shot. That maybe is a little bit less possible, understanding that Teox might actually be the legendary Oxa machine, but who knows? If Scions are involved, I think Oxa is much more possible, but I'm not holding out hope for any of that. I don't think it's likely. For now, we need to wait on the developer livestream that we're going to see on Tuesday to see more details about the episode. Revenant didn't really have much to excite me about story things. There are some bits and pieces that I definitely do like about it, but it's also one of those moments where I can't blame anyone for taking a bit of a break. I also took the time to do a massive project on Dragon Age at the time being, so yeah, after I burned out on that, I did not cover the episode much. There are some things I've missed, there are some videos I still want to do before all is said and done. Hopefully I still have time for that. I do think, however, that Heresy is going to be different. I certainly hope it is. Hive content has always been one of my favourite kinds of Destiny content, and if Heresy is delivering just more of that, then that'll be a nice high note for me. Does that change the needle for everyone else? No, probably not. But it really does depend. I think if you're excited for this story, I can't blame you. But that's purely on the basis of it's a Hive story, and they're talking about shaking up the entire Pantheon. Whether this brings people back generally is a question for a different video that I do want to make next week, after we have seen the Heresy reveal stream. But that's all from me for now. Thank you so much for watching as per usual. If you want to go ahead and leave a like, go ahead and do so to show your appreciation for the content. And if you have any thoughts of your own, go ahead and hit me up in the comments section. If you want more content from universes near and far, remember to hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, has been quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Rodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.